Welcome to the conversation. My name is Kyle, and I am so glad that you have joined us here on the very first online conversation in 2021. You've noticed, and this might be you, that you can now access the conversation live on Sunday mornings on multiple platforms. We are so excited to introduce this. We saw a lot of community develop around the conversation in 2020. We hope that we can catch some of that momentum in 2021 and share the gospel and talk about Jesus and talk about our faith and talk about the integration of faith and life right here for more people, for more access. So wherever you are and however you got here, let me thank you. Let me go ahead and ask you to do a couple of things. Number one, if you are accessing this via YouTube, we want to ask you to subscribe to that channel. If you can do that, that would be great. It would increase our ministry opportunities in 2021. I think that would be an excellent idea for you to subscribe to that channel. Number two, I want you to share this. Share it right now wherever you are. You can send it as a text message. You can email it to somebody, but ask someone to watch with you. If you're not doing it this Sunday, you can do it next Sunday. We want you to partner with someone else to join in great conversations about faith and life and the gospel. And we want you to do that together and develop some community, maybe off the grid. It doesn't have to be an official connection group. It could just be you and some people that you know that want to have some really good, solid conversations about scripture, about theology, about Jesus, and about the gospel here in 2021. Go ahead and share that. Share it on your socials. Share it in a text message, however you want to get there. Before we start, I want to tell you this too. Generally on Sunday mornings when we do this, by the way, we live stream this every Sunday morning at 10 a.m. Central. So wherever you are right now, you can go ahead and bookmark that site. We do this every Sunday. I want to tell you, normally on Sundays on our conversations, we go for about 30 minutes. We do some teaching for about 30 minutes, and then after that, we have what we kind of call the conversation after party, where we open it up for some Q&A. I read the chat, see if there are some questions that we can answer. There's nothing that we won't allow in terms of questions, but this Sunday I can't offer that. As you may know, this Sunday on January 10th, we are also offering again and resuming our in-person adult Bible class here on our campus. So I can't be in two places at one time. I can stream our class, but then I have to go and oversee and direct and make sure that our in-person classes are operating and doing what they should do. I should be able to bring back the Q&A in a couple of weeks, but maybe for this week and next week, we won't have a conversation after party, but we'll bring it back shortly. Those are really great times and there's really great interaction there. So let's get started. We are starting a teaching series here on the conversation called First Gen. And what I want to do in this teaching series is introduce you to a different way to think about the New Testament, to think about the stories and the letters in the New Testament as we look at the culture that surrounded the first generation of believers in the New Testament. I've wanted to do this for so long, and I'm so excited to do this. We're gonna slow roll this. I don't know how long we're gonna take, but what we're gonna do is we are going to do an overview of what are perceived to be the first two chronologically written books in the New Testament, the book of Galatians and the book of First Thessalonians. Scholars debate about which one was written first. I'm in the camp that says Galatians was first. There's a lot of people that think First Thessalonians is first. I don't think it matters. We're just doing them both together. But for the sake of our conversation, we're going to start with Galatians and then we're going to go to First Thessalonians. This teaching series will not be a play-by-play, scripture-by-scripture, blow-by-blow of what happens and what's written in those two books. Rather, we're going to do some overviews, maybe 5-6 weeks in each book to give you a sense of what's happening, but not just in terms of good, solid Bible teaching. I want to show you how these situations and these writings were relevant to the first generation of believers, and then show you how nothing's changed. The only difference between us and the first generation of believers is time. That's all that separates us. The cultures in which Christianity was born, the cultures in which people came to know about Jesus and to follow Jesus are remarkably similar to where we are right here in 2021. And I think this is going to have a tremendous amount of relevance. I think it's going to have a tremendous amount of traction as we roll through the first two chronologically written books of the New Testament. So let's break them down. Today on the conversation, we're going to do an overview, not really in terms of what's written in those two books, but we're going to do an overview of the audience of those two books, the Galatians and the Thessalonians. I'm going to do that by introducing you, giving you an overview of the cities, the Roman cities where these churches were and who received these first two books. So if we're going to go with Galatians, the theory is that if Galatians was written first, and I think it was written to the churches that were planted in Paul's first missionary experience. These are the cities. I'm going to list them for you. They're Pasitian Antioch. The second is Iconium. The third is Lystra, and the fourth is Derbe. And of course, First Thessalonians was written to the Macedonian city of Thessalonica. So those are five cities: Pasitian Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, Derbe, and Thessalonica. I want to give you the lowdown on all five of those cities. And what I think is going to happen is that it's going to blow your mind how remarkably similar the experiences of these first generation believers were as compared to ours. We are, you and me, we're living in an incredibly diverse experience here in 20th or 21st century America. If you are watching this and if you live in Houston, we are the fourth largest city in America, incredibly diverse, multiple inputs, multiple demographics. I think you're going to see some similarities with these five cities. So Galatians, in my opinion, was written first. It was written to four of those five cities: Pasitian Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe. And I'm just going to roll through here. I'm going to roll through some of the descriptions of these four cities first, and then we're going to transition right into the city of Thessalonica. First, let's take a look at Pasitian Antioch. It became a Roman military colony in 25 BC, which heightened its status. It was a massively large Roman city with 100,000 people, all crammed into a very small geographic location. It was on, in fact, all of these cities, with the exception of Derbe, was on a major Roman road called the Via Sebaste. And the Via Sebaste was a road that extended all through modern day Turkey, what we knew or what we know of in Bible maps as Asia Minor, for a couple of reasons. The Romans built this road for two reasons. Number one, they built it to connect the eastern part of their empire. But number two, well, included in that was to make sure that there was an easy way for the Roman military to move in the eastern part of the empire. So let's be clear. It wasn't just some information superhighway, although that's what it became. It was originally designed for rapid movement of the Roman army. And number two, it was a way to hem in some of these places, some of these cities that we're going to talk about, and defend them from some of the more ruthless areas north of, or at least in the middle part of Galatia or in modern day Turkey. So this road was also a barrier of sorts, and Pasitian Antioch was right in the middle of this road. It had a population, again, of about 100,000 people, and it had people from all over the Roman world. Because it was a military colony, there were people from all over the Roman world that lived there. Let me list them for you: Galatians, Phrygians, Greeks, Jews, and Roman army veterans. This was a melting pot of all sorts of people that lived in the eastern part of the Roman Empire. And because it was a Roman military colony, it enjoyed the highest category of status among cities in the Roman Empire. A lot of the residents in that city were actually given Roman citizenship, which is a big deal. That allowed you to have access to the Roman jurisdiction and Roman laws, and it gave you easy transportation. So going to the city of Pasitian Antioch, which a lot of people think there was some connections Paul knew about this place because of some political connections. Going there was of chief importance for Paul. We're going to talk about Paul a little bit later. When Paul and Barnabas entered into the city of Pasitian Antioch, they passed through a triple gate called the Propylon. And the Propylon was actually built in honor of the Roman Emperor Augustus. It was decorated with reliefs of gods and goddesses, winged beings, and warfare. This was a sight to see. In other words, Paul and Barnabas did not walk into some small town. This was a major Roman city. When they walked through this gate, they would have immediately seen a temple to Augustus himself, because it was a Roman military colony initially. The idea of worshiping and paying homage to Augustus was pretty spectacular. It was built on a grid system. There was a lot of forethought given to Pasitian Antioch, and it had all the typical buildings and pagan altars and statues of Roman emperors, especially of Augustus and Tiberius. Archaeologists have discovered statues of both of those, and those statues would have been on display when Paul and Barnabas were there. So this city was a thriving hub of Roman culture. It's not the only one, though. Let's keep moving to the second city. This one is Iconium. It's about 90 miles southeast of Antioch. And actually, under the Emperor Claudius, the city was given the honor of calling itself Claudii Iconium, which is kind of an interesting thing. And it may be right there when it became a Roman colony. It's important to note here that, especially for Paul and Barnabas, they are still traveling the Via Sebaste. They are still on this major Roman road that required or it made easy the transportation for the Roman army, but it became a road of commerce and the interchange of ideas, and that's why Paul and Barnabas are there. So they're going straight, they're staying on this road, and it gives some clarity as to why they went to the cities they went through, specifically in Acts chapters 13 through 15. It was not some happenstance group of cities that where they visited. They were actually following a current road system. So Pasitian Antioch was one. The second was Iconium. Iconium, this is interesting, actually comes from the Greek word which is icon. And that Greek word, you know what icon means. It means image. What's interesting about this is that according to Greek mythology, Prometheus and Athena recreated humanity right there at the site of Iconium after a devastating flood destroyed it all. What they did was they made images of people from mud and they breathed life into them. And so the city of Iconium actually gets its name from Greek mythology, from the place where humanity was recreated. This gives you a sense of the importance of religious ideals in Iconium, at least a very specific group. Iconium was a garden spot in the midst of a desert. There were orchards and there were farms in Iconium. Even though all of this desert surrounded the city itself, it owed its business to being on the chief thoroughfare of Asia Minor, of Galatia, the Via Sebaste. But what was kind of cool about Iconium is that this road connected even Ephesus to Syria. It wasn't, as it became known later, it was a connecting point that developed into what you and I know from World Civ classes as the Silk Road, this interchange of roads and ideas and transportation and trading from the Roman Empire to the Far East. Iconium owed its business to being right there. It wasn't necessarily special for any other reason other than the fact that it was on this road. It was an old city. It traced its history back to 3,000 years prior to when Paul and Barnabas actually visited there. And there was actually a temple of Zeus there, and archaeologists have found evidence of an imperial cult. That's the city of Iconium. Let's go to the city number 3. We're going to go to Lystra. Lystra was a military colony just like Pasitian Antioch. It was also on the Via Sabast. It was at a strategic crossroads. There was a temple for Zeus there, and there are indications that the city was very wealthy, that a lot of people had a lot of money, and it was a tremendous city of consequence here. There were the idea that Lystra was a small place is kind of destroyed by that. In the text of the New Testament, it was at Lystra where Paul and Barnabas were mistaken for Greek gods themselves. We know that there was a massive presence for Greek mythology here in Lystra. And the 4th city is the city of Derbe. Now, the cool thing about Derbe is that it's a little bit off of the Via Sabast, but it is the last city in the Roman Empire at the far eastern edge. It's kind of cool to think about Paul and Barnabas having some sort of strategy here. Pasitian Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe. They go all the way to Derbe. Roman historian Strabo said that Derbe was a toll collecting city. In other words, people who entered in to the Roman Empire from the east, they went through Derbe and they had to pay taxes on their way in. This was an important city, if for no other reason than for that alone. So here we are. Those 4 cities, the cities of Pasitian Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe, were the 4 cities that received Paul's letter to the Galatians. This letter was written, we'll talk about this in a minute, to city people who lived in the interchange of ideas and novelties and business practices and religious ideals. This letter was written to that group of people. 1 Thessalonians was written just to one city. It was written to the city of Thessalonica. And this was a major Roman city as well. It was on another major Roman road called the Via Egnatia, which Roman historian Cicero, or Cicero, depending on where you got your education from, called it one of the great military roads of the Roman Empire. As a matter of fact, Cicero was exiled to Thessalonica for about a year. It was time for him to leave. He could go back to Rome, but he actually stayed put because that road was so crowded. He wanted to wait and travel when the traffic was a little bit lighter. The Via Egnatia was a tremendous road. It allowed transportation from Rome to Byzantium, and if you were a Roman official, you could travel that distance from the western to the eastern part of the Roman Empire in about 21 days. If you were just a normal merchant, it would take you 4 or 5 weeks. It might take you 3 months if you went by ship on the Mediterranean Sea. This was another beginning of another information superhighway. Thessalonica was a pretty fantastic city. It connected land and sea. It had access to the Aegean Sea, so it made it of tremendous importance. It was also a free city, and it had some competing allegiances in the Roman Empire, but because it finally sided with the winners, it was exempt from all taxes, and it was also, because it was a free city, exempt from having Roman troops stationed at its walls. When Paul and Silas and Timothy arrived in Thessalonica to preach the gospel, they did not walk into a religious vacuum. This city of about 200,000 people had about 20 different religious cults worshiping 20 different gods. But what might be a surprise to us is that one of the chief cults in Thessalonica actually centered upon the phallus as a cult object. Now, why I'm bringing that up is that with an epidemic of pornography in American culture, there's a tremendous similarity with some of the ideals and the depravity that was evident in Thessalonica. This city of 200,000 people was a major spot for Paul, especially from what scholars seem to indicate. He spent maybe as little as 3 weeks there, but maybe as much as 3 months. In either case, it was a very limited amount of time. But when he wrote the book of 1 Thessalonians, he actually said, people all over the place have heard about your faith. 5 cities: Pasitian Antioch, Iconium, Lystra, Derbe, in Thessalonica. I want you to breathe deeply the fact that the gospel flourished in the city. It flourished in the city. It was born in rural Palestine, but it exploded early and fast in the city itself. These cities were filled with merchants and soldiers and artisans and slaves and politicians and entrepreneurs, and all of these were from various ethnic groups. And in all of these cities, there were transplants of people from all over the known world. These were not cities filled with one ethnicity, but people of multiple ethnicities, of multiple ideals and multiple beliefs. And in these cities with multiple languages being spoken, the one thing that captured attention, which is exactly like today, is novelty. Novelty transversed the difficulties of communication in these Roman cities. All of these cities politically were tied to imperial ambition. You showed up in these Roman cities to climb the ladder of the Roman government. But the cool thing about these cities is that they were primarily self-governing cities, and that they were also, from what we know now, at the cutting edge of the emergence of Western culture. Local governments were supported, they were protected, and the notion of justice was attractive to many immigrants into these cities. These roads that we talked about two of them. They were built and they were well maintained, and there were multiple avenues and ways for people to talk and to integrate various religious ideals. In any case, it wasn't uncommon for organized and specific religious or specific groups characterized by different ethnicities and religious beliefs or businesses to live side by side, compact in small geographical location. But neither was it uncommon for such groups to be completely and socially integrated. This is the Roman city. It sounds a lot like a place like Houston, although there's a lot more geographical area to cover in a city like Houston. It's the same thing. Wherever you access and however you are watching the conversation, my guess is that your city is filled with multiple ethnicities, multiple ideals, and multiple groups of people. Let's enter into this discussion now. Paul himself. Paul was a man of the city. He was born in the city of Tarsus. It was a city of 200,000 people. It was known for its world-class university. When he was young, maybe 4 or 5 years old, his family moved to Jerusalem so he could be educated in the Jewish law. But it was, I think, the hum and his desire to get back to the city that caused him to go to Damascus first in the narrative of Acts, specifically in Acts chapter 9, to persecute believers there, because Damascus was an important commercial city on the main transport route between Egypt and Mesopotamia. It had been for centuries, and it was in this city, at least on the way to the city and in the city itself, where Paul gave himself and committed himself as a follower of the living Jesus. He heard Jesus on the way to Damascus. This Jesus he thought was dead, he heard him talk. And it was on the way there to this city, and in that city itself, where Paul got a taste of what the city can do for the gospel of Jesus, how it can become this incredible manger, this incredible birthplace of the foremost ideal in human history. After he left Damascus and he went to Jerusalem, he ended up moving back to Tarsus, which was kind of impressive because he goes back to this city of 200,000 people. But when the gospel begins to grow and flourish in the city of Antioch, this is a different city. It's not Pasitian Antioch, it's Antioch, a city of 500,000 people. It was the third largest city in Rome. When the gospel started to flourish there, it was Barnabas who was in Antioch, in a city, right? He went to Tarsus in Acts chapter 11 to find Paul and to bring him to Antioch because the work was so important and Paul was needed in this place. I think he was there because he had a heartbeat for the city. And it was in these cities where the first generation of believers flourished. It was in these cities where we're going to find in the next few weeks common struggles. We're going to find relevance in some of our own situations that we face as followers of Jesus in places that are filled with multiple groups of people and multiple ideals and multiple novelties. What is it like to be a believer? I think we're going to find that, and we're going to find some real clarity about what it means to be believers when we read specifically Galatians and 1 Thessalonians. The reason why we're picking those, I think it's cool to know what the first believers wanted to know and what they faced, and which prompted Paul to write these two letters in the first place. We get right back to the origins of what was most pressing for believers in Roman cities, what they faced and what tempted them and what prompted them and what they needed to hear. And I think we're going to find a lot of commonality between what they wanted to know and what we want to know. We have great questions. What is it? How do we share the gospel in a place that has multiple ethnicities? What do we do about a virus that seems to destroy community and actually hurt people in serious ways? Rome was not immune to lots of viruses. I don't know if we'll touch on that in Galatians and 1 Thessalonians, but scholars actually say that one of the things that tore down Rome itself in the 600s was because of the way that exterior pathogens attacked the Roman citizenry. These questions are still relevant. How do we minister, share the gospel, find community in places where dangerous things can happen at the blink of an eye? You and I live, if you're watching us from anywhere in the United States of America, we have a lot of social protections. There were no social protections for believers in the first century, which made the church critical because that was the social safety net for believers. And that's why it was so pronounced and why within 100 years it had overtaken most of Rome, and within 300 years it was the official religion of the chief empire of the world to date. There's a reason for that, and we're going to see the beginnings of that here in this teaching series. So the first generation of believers, they lived in the midst of the ebbs and flows of economics and culture, where novelty and entertainment abounded, where professionals, laborers, parents, children lived in the midst of the depraved but widely accepted religions. And we can read in these first two letters then with a high degree of familiarity, noting that the only thing that really separates us from this first generation of believers is time. I'm excited about this series and the conversation, and I'm excited about what we're going to be talking about. You want some homework in the next couple of weeks? I would ask you to read Galatians and 1 Thessalonians, small little books in the New Testament. Find a translation that's easy to read. You can find the New Living Translation. That's a great one. Find something that allows your access to be unfettered. Great user-friendly translations. We can talk about the specifics later. You don't need to know all that, all the Greek words and the translate. I want you to read something that you can access and access now. So do that for me before we join the conversation again next Sunday. I want you to read Galatians and 1 Thessalonians, and I want you to read it through the filter of the city, these Roman cities. I want you to read it through the filter of living in a place like Houston, Texas, and Fort Bend County and Harris County. What is it like? What is it like to be a believer here? What is it like? We'll talk about that as we roll on through these weeks. Thank you so much for joining me today on the conversation. Again, don't forget to subscribe if you're on YouTube to whatever channel you're on. Go ahead and hit the subscribe button and share this content with someone. This is going to be a great series. Happy New Year to you. I'm so glad that we were together. I'll see you again here next Sunday at 10 a.m. Central.